We obsess over reactor designs and licensing, but real projects don't fail at the PowerPoint stage. They fail in execution and decision making. Decouple had on an excellent guest recently, Ken Petrunik, who is somewhat famous in the nuclear industry for being able to build nuclear power plants on time, on schedule, and even under budget.
Making the decision, okay? You have to listen, but then you integrate that information. So two things are important. You can't behave as a dictator and do what you want. You must listen. You must learn from everybody in the team because we all have certain skills and attributes. So a good leader is able to make decisions and will make the decision, but he also listens. So part of my personality is I listen. I want that input, but I'm not afraid to take decisions. And I will hold the critical path of a project, and I took the decisions that were necessary. I didn't wait.
And it was a really fascinating conversation with somebody whom I've admired and did have an opportunity to work with a little bit at the Baraka project. But Ken is one of these sort of legends within the nuclear industry who knows pretty much everything. He's been through the construction portion, the business portion, the contracting portion. His background is technical as well. He knows thermal hydraulics and how reactor core should actually function. And I wanted to take just a minute and respond to two of the main points that Ken made in this episode. I'll leave a link to the podcast down in the description so you can check it out for yourself. Ken is an excellent person to talk to, and if you ever get the chance to work with him, you absolutely should. But Ken covers two of the main things that I think are very important today in the nuclear industry. The first being empowering your people and your teams to be able to do the work. And the second is treating your owner, vendor, operators, all of your partners as one team, rather than as competition and fighting for everybody. But first, I'll give a short bio on Ken. He's Canadian, and he's been responsible for building numerous CANDU reactors all over the world, in Argentina, in Romania, South Korea, China, and Canada, of course. So he's been one of these people who's seen multiple different cultures, different ways of working, different types of contracts, different things that people are interested in. And he's been pretty much successful wherever he has gone, which is why he's quite famous in the nuclear industry, because he's been able to manage a lot of these projects and make them successful in ways that other people maybe have struggled. We particularly see in the West now that AP1000, EPR, other projects that have attempted to go are not really succeeding. They're coming in very late. They're coming in over budget. Things aren't ready. And there can be many reasons for why that's happening. But if you're looking for somebody with the experience who has been successful, Ken is really that kind of person. Most of his experience is in CANDUs, but like I said, he did have some time in the UAE where he worked on the APR 1400 at the beginning of that project, helping them set up how that was going to work with the Koreans. And so even on a different design, I think it's fair to say that the APR 1400 was a successful project. And probably the best example of Ken's work is in China at the Qinshan project in the late 1990s and early 2000s, where a couple of CANDU units were being built by the Chinese. And the Canadians were there as the project managers and project support as the technology owners, but all of the labor and work was being done, all the construction was done by Chinese contractors, Chinese EPCs. And if you compare that project, which was ahead of schedule, under budget, compared to like the AP1000 that came up a little bit later and the EPR, both of those projects coming in several years late and over budget, the CANDU experience really does prove that if you have a competent team and a solid design, you can get it out and issued and operating exactly when you need it to. And so I think there's a lot to be learned about how successful projects like that, with leadership like Ken, about how you can make nuclear projects successful. And so the first takeaway that is absolutely crucial here is empowering the people that you work with and the people that you bring onto the project. So one of the things that Ken talks about and what his management style is he assembles an early team of really the best people. And this is something that a lot of projects, especially large projects, may be a bit hesitant about. Ideally, everybody wants to have the best staff and the best people that have done this before. But those people undoubtedly are going to be expensive because they're experienced. They've done it before, they've done it all over the world, and they really know what they're doing, which means they're expensive. And for a project that is getting started, they say, oh, well, yeah, no, these people are going to be expensive. We don't want to spend that kind of money. We'll find somebody else, or we can't convince them to come over. And so part of this soft skills of being able to convince people to come and join your project is going to be so important. What you then have to do is not only have competent people, but you then need to empower them to make decisions. And this is something that Ken does talk about. Modern organizations tend to be moving more and more towards this consensus-driven approach, where you have a leadership team, and below that, middle management teams, and below that, even smaller teams. In order to make a decision or move forward with something, first you have to get the small team agreed. Yeah, okay, there's 10 people there that need to agree. Then you need to convince their management, the middle management, that they also have to be on board with it. And then those people have to convince the senior management. And by the time you get through all of that, there are multiple points for people to say no, even if the people down at the working level are clearly capable of solving the problem and know that this is the solution that should go forward. It gets mired at multiple points of, no, you need to convince me, you need to convince the next level, you need to convince the next level over and over and over again. And what happens is you end up burning so much time because of this. The middle management can't meet until next week. The senior management team meets only once a month on topics like this, and it's going to have to take a decision. They're then going to wait and say, no, we want more information. It gets kicked back down. And before you know it, the decision has been delayed for months on something that could have been taken right away and sent out, and progress could be made.
And in the 1980s, this vogue came in about consensus management. We sit down, we talk, we discuss, and we reach consensus. Well, two problems. Number one, time. If you want to sit down and get to consensus, it takes time. And if you're running a project, critical path, every day is a day. You lose it, you lost it. So you're driven by time. Does consensus management work in that environment? Not really.
And so there are two things that come from this. One is not just the delay, but the diffusion of the accountability and responsibility. We like to talk about, in the nuclear industry especially, about accountability. You're responsible for your actions. But one of the major things that lacks from this in most organizations, especially larger organizations, startups are a bit different. I'll talk about that in a minute. But in large organizations, accountability gets pushed down to the individual and the line levels, but empowerment and authority is kept in a relatively small circle near the top. And I think if anybody who's ever worked at a large company has ever tried to do something, you're responsible for getting your product out or your deliverable out or completing a task, but you're not given the resources to do it, or you're given very small resources to do it. And when you ask for more, well, it's going to be difficult. We need to get approvals. We need to talk to the management. Start what you're doing now with what you have, and we'll see if we can get what you need to do it. And this is a very familiar story. And so people are working to try and get things done, and they don't have the resources or the authority to go and make it happen and get their product out. And authority in this case could be anything from budget authority. Maybe the person knows that, oh, this tooling or this software is what would make this job go twice as fast as it would before. Or I know somebody who has done this 100 times before. Yeah, maybe he's expensive, but we can get him on board and we'll solve this problem in no time. And the working level and the maybe even the intermediate level, the middle manager level, isn't empowered to make those decisions. They get pushed up to a consensus committee that says, well, do you really need that person to come on board and help you out? How are you managing right now? What's the timeline look like? What are the risks if you don't? Check with procurement and HR about what we need to do. And so this distribution of authority and with it a little bit of accountability, and I don't want to say like CYA here, but this distribution of what you can actually do to get the job done gets pushed away from the people actually performing the task and the people who actually know what's going on. And so bringing it back to Ken's point of you should have the accountability and the authority within the organization and at the appropriate levels that can make those things happen. And so I've heard stories of people that have, worked with Ken, and his work style is hey, I need a laptop to be able to go and do my job. And, laptops are only given to the special engineers or whatever, but, a laptop would really help me. Yeah, fine, go get a laptop and get it done. Or I need to bring this expert in and he knows, concrete and rebar, and this is the exact kind of problem we're dealing with. Okay, yeah, go get a contract and get them on board so that we can get it done. And this kind of flexibility and empowerment means that people are more willing to actually go out and do what needs to be done. And they're not going to be hesitant about like, oh, there's going to be such a bureaucratic fight about how we're going to be able to get this done. And it's not even worth it. So we'll just slog along. The project will suffer, but at least I won't be the one that's responsible, and I won't be the one that has to like fight all these additional layers of management in order to get through and get my solution implemented. The counterpoint to that, of course, is that accountability with authority does mean that you're responsible. And so that goes back to then hiring the people that are competent and know what they're doing. So when you're selecting a project or when you're selecting people that are going to be on a project, finding the right people, even if they're expensive, it's what you need to do.
When we staffed up these projects, let's say I'm leading the project, I would collect about 4 or 5 or 6 guys, and we would sit down and say, okay, here's what we have to do. Who do we want? Who's out there? We will collectively distill and say, let's reach out to the best people.
So the expensive part of a nuclear project is not the people. People, yes, can be expensive if you look at, he's making X number of dollars and that's, 50% more than we could have this other person to do it. But compared to the construction cost, the materials cost, the time of money and investment that's required for the actual construction, hiring good, competent people up front, again, even if they're expensive because they've done it before, will help you save an enormous amount on the actual construction timeline, when the unit is going to come online, and making sure that problems that come up, because problems will come up during this period of construction and commissioning, having people that have dealt with those problems before and know what the solutions could be is going to be well worth far more than you're going to be spending on a small amount of experts in labor costs. It's not even close. And if you're looking for those kinds of people that are willing to accept their own accountability and authority and live with it. So it's one thing to say, yeah, okay, I'll hire this person out, and maybe that wasn't exactly what they needed or it didn't work out. Then the person who did that and took that decision has to be held accountable and held responsible. And if that means that person, okay, maybe they're not a good fit for the project anymore, but people that are willing to take on that self-accountability and self-motivation are the kinds of people that you want on a project. And those are the people that drive it to results. They're not necessarily looking for personal glory. Maybe that is a personality trait or not. But if their dedication is to getting the project done from a larger level and doing their piece to get it done, escalating when things are necessary, focusing on getting the work done in their own area when they need to, those are the kind of people that drive projects to success. People that are going to be more, well, we need to take a decision to the committee, we need to push this up, I can't make that decision. Those people will tend to delay your project, slow things down, add costs, add indecision, add time, and that's not how things are going to be successful. Again, going back to the Can-Do project in China, where it was done on time, on budget, one of the things Ken points out is that a lot of the decision-making was able to be localized on the project itself, rather than pushed back to the head office. He talks about that they really only had like one phone line and limited communication. This is late 1990s or early 2000s. There is email, but it's not like everybody has email. Everybody has a connectivity. The site is remote. There isn't going to be internet everywhere.
Working in Argentina for 6 years was an interesting foundational situation. We had one telex machine, one international phone line, and that's how we communicated with head office. We didn't have this real-time virtual stop and email and all that stuff. It was basic and brutal. So a really small group of Canadians out there. And that's sort of where I learned, it's nice to have head office so far away.
And so that means that a lot of the decision-making and a lot of the work has to be done at the site, which means that the project manager for the site and the people that he's delegated the work to are the ones that are driving the project, not decisions back at headquarters, people that are not on the ground and not seeing it. They're off by, 12 time zones from where the actual work is being done. If you send back for decisions every time, you're making a delay and the project just will not complete on time. So the main takeaway here is hire people that know what they're doing and are competent, even if they're expensive, very much worth it. Empower them to make the decisions that actually drive the project and lead to success. Look at what things are being pushed up and driven to consensus committees. Is it really important that a consensus committee is formed for deciding if we need to hire an expert on welding in order to resolve some issue? Or is that something that the line manager and the weld manager knows about and says, yeah, this guy will solve our problems and we can get him here next week? Versus, well, let's take it to committee and go to HR and think about it for a long time. So empower local decision-making whenever possible to the competence and scope that those people are responsible. Because accountability without authority really is a trap that drags down organizations and drags down projects. And the second part that Ken talks about is teamwork. And I don't mean teamwork in the general sense of everybody work together, one team, one goal, everybody's happy. Teamwork in the sense that you have normally several companies and entities and organizations that are working together to make a project successful. Usually you have some sort of prime contractor and vendor, and you have the customer. And what Ken points out is there is a tendency for the vendors and the even subcontractors to be very protective of the work that they're doing and quite scared of exposing themselves to additional liability in the project itself. And that means that now we're, of course, documenting everything. You're sending emails that say, I notified you on this date that this is going to be coming up and you need to be ready. And then when they're not ready, you hold up the emails like, well, I told you so. So this sort of approach of we're in it for ourselves as the vendor, and we're going to try and extract as much out of the customer creates additional friction and this kind of cover your ass approach of, well, we documented everything and we showed you what was coming and you weren't ready. Ken's idea and concept, which I really appreciate, is that you should be working more with the customer as a partner. The ideal outcome for any project is that the project is on time, on budget, and even better if you can do early and under budget.
It was a partnership between owner and vendor. In other words, we had to work as one. Got a great deal of respect, from the Chinese, and I really admire the way they thought, the way they understood, and the way they adapted to us. And one of the key success factors of China was that the owner and ourselves worked as one. We worked as one entity. We were seamless.
And if you're in this constant protective mode of what is the customer asking for, we can't deliver that. Okay, we're going to try and limit our liabilities, or we're going to take them to court because they're not providing information to us, or they're going to take us to court because we're late, and we're going to have exposed liability and liquidated damages and other costs. And from a legal standpoint and a contract management as a large entity, that feels very safe because you're intentionally limiting your exposure and your risk and offloading as much as you can within the contract to the customer. But Ken argues, and I would agree, that this is not the correct approach. Yes, from a legal standpoint, maybe it makes sense, but from a project delivery standpoint, this is just creating additional frictions and difficulties and eroding trust between the vendor and the owner or the customer who's going to be receiving it. Because if they're constantly being blocked or told that, well, we told you this or the contract says this, then it eliminates that feeling of, okay, we're both in this to deliver this project on time. And so it requires a bit of a shift in how the project is viewed and how the entities are viewed. Yes, you have one person or one entity that's the vendor and delivering the project, and you have the customer who's accepting, reviewing, perhaps providing some of the support services, maybe like in the China case, even doing the actual construction in support of the vendor. But both need to be aligned to deliver the project on time and on budget as a single organization. And that may mean additional information sharing. And that can be, of course, captured in the contract up front. So perhaps the contract is structured so that, okay, we'll provide you information about where we are in the schedule, where we think that risks are going to be coming up, and we will work together on how we can best address that. not saying things like, we'll notify you of the schedule only if it slips by this amount. We're not going to let you review the individual things that are going on. It's best if everybody involved in the project, because the customer is obviously a very key part of this project. If everybody is working with good information and working towards a clear same goal. So all that to say, risk management is important, of course, but risk management in the sense of how are you making sure that the project is delivered on time, not how are we protecting ourselves from getting sued left and right from the customer or taken to claims, because you're not going to litigate your way to a successful project. If the teams are not aligned and the customer is not aligned and the vendor is not aligned with the outcomes, and there are different incentives driving each one, then the project is going to be delayed. It's going to be tied up in arbitration and contract disputes, and things just get more expensive and later, and nobody leaves happy.
And when we got into difficulty, at one point, I sort of borrowed a word from China. They have the 5-year plan. I had the 100-day plan. And I went to the owner and I said, look, we're going to be late. I don't want to pay liquidated damages. And you want the job on time. Can we do something?
So Ken's recommendation and work practice here is quite reasonable. It's let the customer see what you're doing, be transparent as possible so that they know what's going on, so that when things come up, they're not surprised. They've worked with you every day. This could be things like looking at like I said, the schedule. And how is the schedule laid out? The customer has full access to the schedule to see what's coming up. They can ask questions.
One of the things that we decided to do was to be fully transparent. And so we said, here, Mr. TQMPT owner, you will have access to our level 2 schedule real time. So the owner would sit there, and I'd be at work at 7 in the morning. And at 3 minutes after 7, the owner would come in and say, Ken, look at the schedule. Look at A, B, C, D. And I said, okay, hold it. This is real. This is noise. This is not. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, they got it.
And after a while, they will start to say things like, oh, this looks like it's a problem. What do you think? What are you doing to solve this? And that interaction then provides a response for the vendor to say, well, we're doing X, Y, Z, or perhaps we can work together and say, this is being delivered late. What can we shift around on your side or on our side in order to make this work? And it's a joint effort to try and solve problems rather than finger pointing about this is late, you need to fix it. And well, it's late because of what you did and we're not going to adjust. You're just going to have to eat that cost. This is counterproductive and doesn't help anybody get the project out. And I think this leads to something that really covers where we are today in the nuclear industry. We have a number of very large established entities that have been making reactors for decades now. They've been in the nuclear industry for a very long time. They're very well recognized, and you would certainly know some of the names. And lately, over the last 4, 5, 6 years, we've had a number of startups that have come in that are taking a different approach. And this talks about the difference between a large established organization and a startup organization. Large existing organizations, of course, are going to have a lot of technical depth. They have existing customer bases, they have technology that they've developed, and they have intellectual property rights over many, many years. But these large organizations, as time goes on, they collect more and more administrative layers and administrative controls. Some of this comes from the legal side, where we need to control how we're organized and how we're managing our risks and how we're controlling our contracts. But some of that just happens naturally, or it's from a previous era where management styles were different. And I know at least 2 companies, and you can probably come up with more on your own, where these are large organizations with 2,000, 3,000 people. Every single hiring decision is routed through the CEO. So regardless of the position, the person gets interviewed by the line management or the middle management, depending on where it is. They then give their recommendation. That recommendation goes up to the next level. It goes through HR. HR does some reviews on backgrounds, which of course is going to be necessary. But then it gets routed up to the VP level. The VP says, okay, yeah, this person should go forward. It eventually gets routed up to the CEO. The CEO is now reviewing every single person who's going to be hired in this organization. And these are not small groups. These are organizations of 3, 4, maybe even 5,000 people. And if every single hiring decision is going through the CEO, that's slowing things down. Because at any point, you now have 10 veto points along the way that somebody that could have been brought in a week or two is now being pushed out because those people aren't available for making a decision. They kick it back because they want to have more information about the person, or they want additional candidates interviewed. And it comes with this delay and delay because the person who is actually going to be working, or the person who's actually making the hire in the group that he's running or she is running, doesn't have the authority to actually put this person in and get the work done. And this is one of the big problems of how large established organizations work. And I'm giving an example just of hiring, but this goes across the board in other areas of we want to make a change to the process. We need this piece of equipment or this piece of software. All of these decisions get pushed out and the decision making gets distributed along with many places where anybody who says no means that nothing happens. If you compare this to a startup culture where you have a lot more local control over the individuals, the teams tend to be smaller, as a startup will be, but the CEO will delegate authority down to people who are experts in their areas. The CEO is busy trying to raise money, he's trying to get customers, he's trying to do all of these other things that are not directly related to managing the individual day-to-day type of minutia of, does this guy need a different type of laptop or monitor? The CEO is not going to be involved in that. And this is something that gives startups an enormous advantage in this space. There's a bias towards action and getting things done. And while there is going to be a learning curve on things like QA and documentation and compliance, these are things that can be worked out and integrated responsibly later on. Once the startup gets moving and starts getting customers and designs out, or whatever it is that they're actually going to be working on. So the question becomes, how can we manage these sort of two different approaches where one, you have a lot of authority that's given to the individuals and to the individual groups versus more control over the whole organization, especially as organizations get larger, contracts get more complex, and project delivery becomes more and more important. And this is where I think Ken's two main points really come in. The first, again, being able to get responsible people who know what they're doing in and giving them the authority along with the accountability to make the decisions at the level that's required so that you're not spending time in committees and distributing decisions and delaying things for weeks. When you're in the middle of a construction project, you can't be doing that. And the second, working with the customer, suppliers, whoever it is that you're dealing with on the other side, so that they have the same important information that you do, so that when decisions have to be made, when things happen that don't go so well, everybody's working towards a common goal with a common set of interests, and that has to be to get the project done.
It's a story about having a team that's dedicated and committed to the project. Sometimes in life, we work for a company, the signature of the CFO is on the check. But when we work on a project, we work for the project. And it's that culture, that driving culture that makes a difference. Like myself being up in the middle of the night on concrete pours. It's this commitment to the project as the driving force and the integrator. But it is that alignment and visibility on the project rather than a functional type corporate structure where it's just a tiny piece in a puzzle that floats around. When I get up in the morning, I'm in my office, I see the site.
Yeah, from the window.
And who do I see? It's at 7 o'clock in the morning, the owners, right? You taught me. So you get this. We're all focused on that. And maybe it's that driving focus, that attention that we're united by this particular bond, that we are totally dedicated no matter what company we come from, all coming together. And it was that focus that brought us together. And maybe that's a missing piece that we need to look at, is how do we create that driving culture, that commitment, that dedication to succeed.
So again, if you haven't heard Ken's name, he's quite famous within the nuclear industry. So I highly recommend you go check out the Decouple podcast episode. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. So thanks for listening to my thoughts on this. I do think that this is actually one of the most important things that we can discuss in the nuclear industry about how to make projects successful. And it's people like Ken with their approach and their attitude about how to make a project successful and not looking for individual success or glory is how that we make sure these nuclear projects succeed on time and on budget.